Welcome to the VMware Multi-Cloud podcast. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today I have my co-host David Jasso. Today we're going to be covering simplifying multi-cloud operations using the VMware Cloud Ready Framework. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Eric.
Fantastic.
Hey, with us today we have William Lamb and John Maronne, and asked them each of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there. William, how about you first?
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys. William Lamb. I'm a senior staff solutions architect working out of our VMware Cloud business unit at VMware.
John?
John Maronne, lead multi-cloud architecture globally for the cloud sales BU in VMware.
All right, cool. Hey, we're going to be talking about the work you guys are doing on the Cloud Ready Framework. We'll get into that in a minute. But, for our audience, how about each of you just tell us a little bit about your background, kind of, where you come from and what you're doing now and all of that, and then we'll get into today's topic.
Sounds good. I'll go first, I guess. So actually, before joining VMware, I was actually a customer for a large number of enterprises. Before VMware, I worked at Salesforce.com, running their R&D infrastructure, doing VMware, obviously. I've been at VMware for coming up at almost a decade now. So I've been using our stuff since probably 2003, 2004 timeframe. My day-to-day these days is driving our Customer Zero initiative within our VMware Cloud business unit, working closely with our partners, our customers, as well as our PMs and engineering teams, and kind of helping formulate some of the early design aspects of it, but also, basically being the first customer going through some of our solutions themselves and making sure that it's design, usability, architecturally, all these different aspects of building a solution for our cloud business unit.
Cool, great, nice background coming from Salesforce and using our stuff and now working with customers to help them master what it's all about and what we're doing with our technologies. Hey, John, how about yourself?
Yeah, so prior to coming to VMware, I spent the balance of my career working with and for service providers and traditional VARs looking to become service providers or MSPs. So I've held up, virtually every role within the partner organization, all of which have been really centered around VMware. So very early on, I was doing operations support with VMware technology, moved into pre-sales, moved into product development, and kind of up and down the chain there. So now I lead multi-cloud architecture for the cloud sales business unit, as I mentioned. And effectively, we're a pre-sales organization that helps customers formulate their multi-cloud strategy, but also execute on it through technical pre-sales support, architectural guidance, and best practices, working across direct customer opportunities as well as with our VCPP and other partners as well.
Cool, very nice. Hey, you guys are going to be talking about cloud architecture and some of the work you guys are doing. And I know you're just introduced a new framework, multi-cloud framework that's available in a white paper, and there's a blog out on it. Before we get into that, maybe you can kind of give us a background around this concept of architectural guidance in clouds. I know that there have been some other efforts out there by Amazon and Azure and Google. Maybe you can just sort of give us a context set, and then we'll get into what VMware is doing. Either one of you can jump in, just tag team.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start. So the genesis of this was really looking at what AWS has done, kind of as the first introduction of their well-architected framework. Azure has followed with their own framework. Google and Oracle are also developing theirs. And this has been the standard in the market for a while around cloud environment design and adoption and best practices. From everything from operations to cost to sustainability to security. And as VMware started to execute on VMware Cloud and the multi-cloud strategy, and it started to cement itself within the hyperscalers, we started hearing from customers and noticing that there was a need for prescriptive guidance to our customers, to the market, and in the community that wasn't only grounded in cloud-only environments. It wasn't only driven by native services that were being consumed to build and operate the environment. So when we started talking about, with the expansion of VMware Cloud and AWS, VMware Cloud and Dell EMC, all the hyperscaler solutions with AVS and GCVE, and others, there was a real need to provide a common thread between native cloud environments, customers' on-prem environments, whether they're remaining as they are or undergoing modernization, and really providing sort of a center of gravity between native cloud-only environments and on-prem. And we felt that with the advancements around VMware Multi-Cloud and that strategy and the execution of it, we could put together something pretty compelling to help tie that story together for our customers and allow them to consume best practice and architectural guidance that aligned with where they were in that journey, right? So we're trying to meet the customer where they are, whether it's early on in their migration or they're very mature in the cloud. We wanted to build something behind that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think John kind of hit it on the head, right? Is around meeting where the customers is at, and it's really getting them on this journey, right? We have customers across the spectrum, certainly much further down this path of, leveraging cloud solutions, including multi-cloud offerings as well. And to a lot of customers who are just getting started on that journey, right? And it's not just the architecture and the best practices and the guidance, but a lot of it is just education, making sure customers understand all these different offerings that we have. And I felt like as we looked at this, the space that obviously has been exercised, by a number of folks in there, we wanted to kind of make sure that we differentiated ourselves to make sure that we focus on the areas that really make sense for our customers and help them, especially as they start to look at infrastructure transformation. And then obviously as they get closer towards, app modernization and is really important for our VMware customers specifically in that area.
Yeah. Hey, David, I have a question, or at least a comment too, which is, I got to imagine, much in the days when we were adopting virtualization, there was kind of design patterns for ways to adopt virtualization back when there were very few people that did it, and they were the early adopters, and then there were then everybody learned. And I got to imagine when you're building a hybrid cloud environment like this, there's kind of the early adopters that have gone through the learning experience, but then there's the bulk of people that are now starting to take this on. And to some degree, you're actually just building a practice to allow the lessons from the early adopters to be handed down effectively to the bell curve of the people that are doing these implementations, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And I think the other motivation behind this overall framework, as John, nicely put it down to, it's also taken the learnings that we've done with a lot of our large customers. They're certainly the early adopters, and we've certainly gone down these paths and have really helped them become successful. And at the same time, there was a lot of learnings that came out from the customer's point of view of, organizationally, are you ready for cloud? What are some of the practices that you change, right? From going from an on-prem world to hybrid to multi-cloud. Just operationally, it's very, very different. And a lot of times you're actually giving up some functionality, right? And you're getting back return of value and time. And so just what do you need to think about, from a security standpoint, operational, automation, all these different things where, you might do things very differently in on-prem. What we found from a lot of these large customers, we're able to get all these different insights. And we felt that we were best positioned to not only aggregate this information for customers, but help distill that in ways that made sense for them and kind of guide them throughout their journey, whether they're just starting on this cloud journey or they're starting to look at multi-cloud and hybrid cloud scenarios.
Yeah, I wanted to raise a question, sort of clarify something, and raise a question. When we're talking cloud, we're really almost always talking about multi-cloud, right? So because we're now on all the hyperscalers, so Amazon, Google, and Oracle, and IBM, and I'm sure I missed some here, Alibaba, and then we're also got 4,000 plus MSP partners, right? So that's sort of the landscape we're looking at. And I know when when AWS did their well-architected framework, they're really like, hey, how do you optimize for running on AWS? This is beyond that, right? This is looking at, how do you deploy across a landscape of multiple clouds, right? I mean, that's sort of, I think, a core difference between what we're trying to do and what the hyperscalers are doing. John? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It's an effort to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Right. So, obviously we believe VMware Cloud is the vehicle for the fastest path to cloud, the fastest path to modernize your infrastructure and applications. But VMware is not the entirety of a customer or a partner's technology landscape, right? They use other industry standard tools, Ansible, Terraform. They're using native cloud services across the various public clouds. And the value we see in this is the ability to help them tie that together, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of value and really the ability VMware brings to be able to really support a customer's choice in public cloud adoption and the flexibility to change or augment that as they need to. And the consistent infrastructure and operations behind that are really kind of the vehicle to do so. And in that, we really found that providing that comprehensive view of best practices and learnings and observations and guidance, whether it's organizational guidance, as William mentioned, around just readiness and alignment of their business to move forward under this model, or if it's technical guidance around connectivity or security controls and policy placement. We needed to have a way to speak to our customers in the market to convey this guidance, but also allow it to extend and link back to the well-architected frameworks that are in place if customers are going deep in native services on that side. And if they have ancillary or adjacent VMware services they're using, we also want to pull those in when and where appropriate as this framework starts to evolve. So while we're very much at the beginning, right, we introduced it as a concept, we're putting more writing behind it to really put some meat on that bone, for a lack of better words. But we want to tie all these together because that's the situation for our customers. It's never just one, right? It's this and that and these, all with different requirements, all with different outcomes, but they have to work in unison and they have to operate efficiently. And we think we can drive some of that with this framework.
Cool. William, any thoughts on that one with in terms of the framework and kind of what we're trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, no, I think John definitely, hit on the head, right? Is that it's not just one particular hyperscaler versus another. It's like for our customers, they see VMware and they're looking at us as a trusted advisor, and as they start to consume these different offerings, and it's not just pure public cloud, pure hybrid, or pure on-prem. You're starting to kind of, those worlds are starting to bleed in a little bit. You look at something like AWS Outpost, for example, right? Or VMware Cloud and Dell Dimension. You're now getting the benefits of a cloud service. It just happens to run on your on-prem world. And so we're really kind of mixing those things up. I think we're calling that like local cloud now. So even cloud in itself is blurry. And so for VMware and our customers, right, we're delivering an outcome for them, right? How to solve true business outcomes. And when they look to VMware, they're going to be looking for guidance of like, well, how do I manage these things? What are the visibility? VMware Cloud as a service is going to be that SaaS level service that's going to give customers visibility to know where you're at, right? And you'll start to see more of that in terms of how you consume these services. But as you start to build, architect, operate these things, customers are going to look to VMware and say, how do I do this? And how do I do it in a consistent manner? We don't want them to consume these fantastic offerings and all of a sudden this becomes 2x, 3x more expensive or more costly because they need to go to each of these providers and say, what are all your best practices, right? And we're going to be working closely with these different hyperscalers. And so this is really going to be a single place for customers to go and learn about our solutions, but also how to best build, architect, and design as they start to move forward with their transformation.
Okay, cool. So one of the things I heard you guys say was, the architectural guidance that the hyperscalers are providing still relevant, but there are some aspects of it that's still relevant. But when you're looking to that next level of abstraction where you're running VMware technologies across, a multiple cloud environment, this is kind of where you get that guidance, right?
I have one other question with regard to the purpose of what you're writing in the documents. Like to some degree, there's the customers itself, but isn't there like channel partners? Also, we have VCDXs. We have a whole bunch of expert architects that are actually driving this. Some of this is also to train them, right? To make sure that everybody is architecting consistent cloud solutions, so that you save those guys who are also directly helping customers, right?
Yeah, I agree. Some of the frameworks and structures that we have internally are like VCDX. There's some other internal processes that William is tied closely to in customer readiness review. There are validated designs. There's a VMware Cloud Architecture Toolkit. There's a lot of internal expertise and knowledge and material behind that around how to do well-architected environments. On-prem, hybrid cloud, or multi-cloud. So our hope and our intent is to really start to aggregate all of that information that really pushes a best practice and guidance forward for our customers and bring along internally those experts to help author some of the content, help put the direction forward of what we should be talking about, how we should be thinking about it, and then take some of the things our customers are telling us, through the vehicle that William mentioned earlier, to insert in not only our guidance but real world scenarios that we're helping our customers work through.
The frameworks that are out there, I've looked at a lot of them. They all have sort of a common approach, right? There's this idea of some sort of overarching master framework that discusses in broad concepts all the areas that they're going to look at, and then they all drill down into something they maybe call pillars or something like that then go deep on different areas that sort of are areas of focus. And then they put together their best practices and guidance in those areas. And it's everything from configuring the environment to using specific services. How are we approaching the question of how to organize this material? And maybe you can start to talk about what the framework actually looks like.
Yeah, definitely. So we think about the framework very similarly. I think it's just sort of the lens that you're putting under, right? I'll give you an example. If you look at AWS, they have these pillars for the well architected, and you think about this framework, it's applied to kind of, their granular foundational services like S3, Dynamo, right? As you're thinking about how you might build an application or even a complete organization for that matter, right? When you put the lens onto VMware, we're already providing you an already architected, scalable solution on top of these hyperscalers. So our lens is going to be very, very different. And what our customers are going to care about is sort of not what is the underlying EC2 instance that's running. Sort of like, well, what does ESXi have to do with the picture? What's my boundaries for support, right? In the case of VMware Cloud and AWS, customers are no longer patching, upgrade, don't have to worry about it, right? It's all taken care of by VMware. And so when you think about best practices and these frameworks, it's really on the lens of what matters to customers. And so the solution is very different. And so our set of pillars will be very similar. I'll go into a second to kind of talk a little bit about them, and then John can chime in. But the point there is that we want to make sure that we focus on the areas that make sense to the customers, and these are the different differentiating aspects of it, right? That they need to kind of think about and consider as they go through this journey with us. And so for the framework, we have a plan pillar, our build, secure, modernize, and then operate. So these are our 5 VMware pillars. And each of these, like you said, David, it's going to go down into very specific areas of concepts that customers and partners need to think about as they think about VMware Cloud-based SCDCs. And in terms of output and collateral, you're absolutely right. It's very similar, and it's kind of an industry model, right? Is that you have this framework in place, and the output of collateral are things that we call design guides, right? That will be focused on use case. For example, VM migration has certainly been a key one for a lot of customers, whether it's data center evacuation, doing hybrid where they're maybe offloading a set of infrastructure onto the cloud, to things like disaster recovery and even cloud native applications, right? So these design guides are going to be very focused around the use case. What is the business outcome? They're being written in a generic fashion, right? So that they are applicable across the different VMware cloud-based solutions. And then when we get into the very specific hyperscaler details, for example, if we're going to do connectivity to AWS, it's probably going to look very different than if you compare that to Azure or even GCP, for example, right? And there we have some collateral called design lists that will encompass the very specific details, configuration, and even the considerations that you might have to think about, right? We'll offload a lot of that to help customers think about, what they really need to worry about and take away some of the things that they don't need to. But ultimately, the customers do need to look at what their business requirements are, and using these different pieces of collateral. And obviously, the VMCR framework kind of wraps this overarching set of collateral together.
So design guides, more generic, sort of working across the concept and multiple clouds, sort of a conceptual, and then design lists. Was that? And those are things that sort of be more specific to each cloud environment.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And there'll be reference to it and together. And so we have a platform internally at VMware called Tech Zone. And a really cool thing you can do is you author all these different pieces of content. And we have this capability called an activity path. And actually strings and constructs this overall into an experience. So as a customer, you don't actually see these details, right? You go in and you say, hey, I'm interested in doing disaster recovery, right? These are my requirements. I can go focus on, what are the clouds that I'm thinking about? And as you go through this, you can kind of look at the pillars, and we'll have specific guidances across the board to help you better understand how to best implement and design this particular solution.
Cool. I wanted to go through recap the five pillars that you plan, build, secure, modernize, and operate. Maybe you can sort of just give us a flavor of each one of these. I know that these are things in progress and still being developed, but maybe kind of what you think falls into each one of these categories and some of the big concepts around each of them.
Yeah, John, you want to take us through a couple, and I can kind of close up with them?
Yeah, sure. So if we start with plan, this would be around defining the scope, the requirements, what sort of operating model, identifying applications that you're going to move or deploy. This is where customers would take the initial assessment and lay of the land, and what are the requirements and outcomes they have to do going forward. Start to map those two activities around design and implementation. All right, so this is really kind of the earliest stages of the journey for a lot of customers. What we would discuss in this things around organizational principles and culture, their internal alignment from an org perspective. Are they ready to adopt a cloud model? Are they agile enough to do it in a meaningful time? They would start to assess existing workloads, talk about infrastructure and application dependencies, how to design for scale and performance, discuss cloud provider SLAs or SLOs. So this is kind of a complicated conversation when you start to look at multi-cloud deployments, because every cloud provider addresses service levels a little different, and subsequently different services within their portfolio have different SLAs, right? So it's a big conversation and understanding that you have to get to around service availability. What sort of uptime do you have to guarantee for your business? What does the application require? And then you have to look at from a partner standpoint. It's going to look a little different if it's a VMware owned, managed, and operated environment like VMC on AWS or VMC on Dell EMC. It's going to differ a little bit from our partner solutions with Azure VMware solution or Google Cloud VMware Engine, or if you're going native, right? So understanding what you're getting into from a service level point of view is quite important when you look at the availability of a business application. And then finally, service infrastructure services, NTP, DHCP, DNS, things like that you need to bring with your applications and your workloads as you move to cloud, or how do you consume those and deliver those from a native services point of view?
Does the plan stuff, the content, actually help you understand what the value prop is for the given choices? So there are technical choices that you have to make and determine what you're going to implement. But then there is also this, like, how do I know which one would actually be better for me, right? And I know there are the checkbox things that you have to plan for, but then there's also, I always struggle with, how do I know which direction to go, because maybe I don't understand enough to know. Do you give kind of like guidance in this on how to make decisions?
I think that's a really good point, Eric. I think the one thing that we didn't really mention is that the overall VMCRF, it's not just focused on traditional VM-based workloads. I think a lot of us kind of assume that that's going to be obviously the primary scenario. But we have, like I said earlier, a lot of our customers, especially the early adopters and the ones that are really pushing the boundaries, that see the benefit of cloud and kind of getting out of, quote unquote, the data center business, right? And to say, what am I doing for my organization that really moves the needle for my business, not running IT, and reassessing those resources. And what we found is that, they are definitely thinking about app transformation, app modernization. And now it's not just like, okay, I'm going to pick up these workloads, transform them, and overnight, magically, that's going to give value. In fact, we've talked time after time with many customers where if they were to rewrite everything and refactor everything, they would actually add zero value to the organization. Their CIO would say, why am I spending millions of dollars? What did I actually get brand new, other than saying, hey, it's a 12-factor app? So I think it is really important, the plan stage overall for a lot of these customers. It's really one of the most critical pillars, is right to understand, is your organization ready for cloud, but also to assess your application estate. What are your business goals? It's something that we can provide some guidance. We can say, these are customers we've worked with different segments and verticals, and this is what we've seen, right? Freddie Mac is a great example, right? Where they say, we're completely getting out of the data center business, right? We don't see any value in that, but we want to leverage the exact same IT team. So it's not getting rid of them. It's to say, I'm going to put their use where we can start to actually transform the application space, move, the business into areas where we need to actually invest in and move faster than what they would have been able to do. And COVID is a unfortunate but good example of this, right? That they've been able to move faster and say, these applications, these experiences for my business, this is where I want to change it, right? Maybe it's going from an on-prem static database to now a dynamic system that lives in AWS or GCVE. And now my development team can now start to expand upon the customer user interface, right? It has nothing to do with VMs or containers or Kubernetes, but that's really where they need to assess that. So part of it is we have tools that can definitely help customers look at, here are your different workloads, whether it's VMs, if you have some containers, and say, these are the candidates. Ultimately, it's up to the organization to decide, where are you on that journey, right? Is it just to get onto cloud so that you can transform your infrastructure, so that you can actually start to have that deeper conversation about application transformation? We have some customers who say, you know what, I need to start transforming my organization. I need to show value. And so they might have certain applications that they will assess and say, these are really critical. So we definitely have some toolings and some guidances across that board. But yeah, it was going to be something that, the organizations need to decide based on what's important for them.
Right. I can definitely see where, like maybe I need a hardware refresh, and I'm in this point where I'm considering hardware refresh. And so hardware refresh planning might be different than application, maybe I'm refreshing my applications. And so the planning around what's driving the value of this, right? And you're right, it could be getting out of the data center business, could be hardware refresh or hardware augmentation, or it could be modernizing your applications, right? And then that planning, then I have to decide what's driving me for that, and then based on that, what decisions do I make, because hardware refresh is different than application refresh, right? And so yeah, interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one piece of feedback I would say that from what we've seen from customers is that it is definitely much easier to start to have that conversation and actually execute on an app modernization strategy once you've transformed your infrastructure. It can definitely be done on non-cloud-based infrastructure, but what we found from talking to customers, and I'm sure John can chime in on some of his experiences working with some of our customers, is that it is much harder. And so we have been seeing this pattern emerge that, you migrate your workloads first. And as part of that, once you've done that, you don't need to migrate all of it, right? It's kind of in flux. Customers are constantly planning and moving just enough, right? And then they start to take advantage of cloud native services, take advantage of some of the solutions that we have as part of our Tanzu portfolio and all that. And we have seen that pattern emerge as one that's been very successful for many of our customers.
Hey, related to some of this, because we started to get into the portfolio, one of the things that's that's clear about the other guides that are out there is that they talk a lot about process best practices, operational issues, but they also get into the technology, right? So they're not shy about talking about, AWS isn't shy about talking about its technologies and where they fit in each of those sections. How about, do we get into some of where our technologies fit? I'm thinking particularly in the plan space, some of the value that our management portfolio brings to the table. Do we get into that level of depth and around how some of the technologies support each of the pillars?
Yeah, we will. Right. So some of this has started already with the recent migration tooling white paper that William and Amal Yunus put out, I think probably about a month ago now, where not only did it provide guidance and best practices for workload migration, but it also offered a detailed analysis of what some of the options are to facilitate that move, right? And we're looking at similar things to incorporate into subsequent content of the framework that will provide guidance on VMware-based tooling or industry standard tooling that would be a fit based on the pillar concept, based on the point in the journey, based on what technology we're talking about or what outcome the customer is trying to achieve. And this is where again, this is where we're really leaning heavily on having this framework be somewhat of a center of gravity. So we can have this overarching conversation around architectural guidance, best practices, organizational principles, and everything we discussed, but then also back it up from a linkage to native services, linkage to other VMware tooling that can support customers in actioning the things that we're talking about.
Cool. So when we spent some time with plan, we don't have to go into great depth, but maybe a sketch of each of the other areas: build, secure, modernize, operate, in terms of what do you think is going to be in each of those areas?
Yeah. So, as kind of mentioned, plan is the most important one, right? These other pillars, start to make a little bit less sense if you don't got it planned. And obviously, customers have been very successful once you spend enough time investing in that. And again, it's really key to understand that it's not planning your entire migration estate. We don't expect that in practice. No customers doing that. It's planning just enough, whether it's doing a POC, planning just enough based on the application experience, right? It's really this area. And then the next logical step, if you think about it, is around building it, right? If you're talking about a migration, VM migration-based workflow, then you're looking at building your SCDC. To your point earlier, David, around some of the tooling, so we have things like VMC Sizer, so it helps you size your infrastructure. So once you assess the workloads, you can say, hey, these 40 applications with maybe 100 plus VMs, I now need to size this out to say, what is my actual VMware cloud-based SCDC going to look like? So we have different toolings to help you there. We also have something called Launchpad that will heavily quick view guide you through to actually setting all this infrastructure up. You set up network connectivity. So that's all kind of encompassing of the build. If you're thinking about cloud native in that space, right, it's around using a project that we've recently kicked off called Project Iris that has a similar assessment tool that will start to look at your application estate, look at the dependencies. And then part of the portfolio is actually to identify certain types of workloads like J2E, Java-based application, and actually take those application as is running in and actually converting them into a container-based application. So getting it ready so that you can then transform that, across these, what we normally call the 5 R's or the 7 R's, right? Whether you're refactoring it, revising it, those kinds of details. So that's kind of encompassing of the build framework. We then have a secure framework. We want to really focus on key security, not just on typical network physical security, but there's a lot of other areas of things like IPAM, compliances, auditability. These are all things that you should really think about and consider. And we felt that this was enough content to kind of fit into its own pillar. And you see security being a key pillar for many of the other well-architected frameworks as well. After that, we have something called Modernize. This one's actually an interesting one because as we were developing the framework, there's a lot of healthy debate of what should this be called. We got a lot of motivation and inspiration in the early days of looking at, our VMware Cloud and AWS migration strategy, right? Which we had these phases called plan, build, migrate, and operate. And you kind of see there's some similarities to where we ended up with the framework. And we felt that, we just said migrate, most people will imagine, okay, you must be talking about VM migration. And we definitely are. But again, a lot of customers also think about app modernization. And how do you think about that? And so modernize felt like the right word to describe both these scenarios, right? Customers are doing a little bit of both. Some will be more heavier than one than the other. And so in the modernize phase, this is you implementing the actual workload migration and or cloud native transformation, right? Could be refactor. It could just be taking advantage of cloud native services. And so there's a lot of concepts to think about in terms of how you manage that strategy. Where do you find value? Where do you start? And obviously, we'll have VMware specific tooling around that. So that's the modernized pillar. And then finally, we have the operate, right? Really key piece of it, like John kind of mentioned early on. During the plan phase, you talked a little bit about SLAs, SLOs, understanding the availability constraints, backup, disaster recovery, both for traditional VM as well as cloud native. What are all those requirements? How do you go and identify the KPIs that matters to your business? There's going to be a number of KPIs that are going to be technical. And how do you go about implementing that? And the nice thing about all these different pillars is that VMware has certainly a set of toolings and services that are available, but we also have other partner solutions, right? Depending on where the customers are at today, whether it's a cloud service or if it's a typical, on-prem shrink wrap piece of software to help you understand, what are the metrics that you can collect. So at a high level, that's kind of the overall framework and the different pillars.
Cool. Sounds great. I think it's going to help customers a lot. And so what's available already? I think there's a couple pieces that are out already, and then plenty more to come. But maybe you can just highlight again for us what's already available. Oh, there's my dog. Let's go this way. There he is.
So to date, there was a blog announcement around the concept of the framework, a few details around what it is. Within the blog, there was a link to the white paper, which is effectively a rundown of the concept of the framework, of the positioning, who the audience is, some level of detail around each pillar, a few bullets around the concepts that you will find in each pillar that we'll talk about and expand upon moving forward. And really just it is the introduction of the idea and the concept for us and where we're going to take it, right? So this was, I think maybe a week or two ago, so it's still very early. Myself, William, and the rest of our working team, we're working towards, first expanding upon each pillar in a lot more depth, and then subsequently getting into other concepts within each pillar that, would align with the journey, would align with where our customers are, and incorporating a lot of the tooling considerations and other frameworks we have internally to inform some of that guidance.
Yeah, and this is a big effort, right? You've got a lot of people involved in this, right, across the company.
Oh yeah, this is a huge cross-functional effort. I think this probably started late last year, and then there's certainly a number of folks that have contributed to this effort, right? And I think it's not only expanded upon the actual framework itself. You'll start to see some collateral updates there, but I think it's also the target audience, right? Helping CIOs, CTOs, cloud architects to understand kind of what are things that they need to start thinking about, right? The framework is going to be continuously evolving. We're constantly learning from customer engagements as we speak. We're going to have feedback from our partners, our hyperscaler partners as well too, to kind of guide and say, where areas. And a lot of it too is also linking to existing collateral. A lot of collateral that exists out there today. If you look at like the SLA documentation for VMware Cloud and AWS, it exists already, right? But we want to make sure that it's available in one central place. You'll start to see more areas of evolvement of this centralized form. Today it's a white paper. You'll start to see more of that evolve in the coming months as well. And then we also started to publish some designlets. And so you're starting to get some tactical things that you can leverage right now. Network connectivity is a huge topic on VMware Cloud and AWS, and I'm sure this is the same for the other hyperscalers. And there are just so many different options and solutions today. And so we want to make sure that we balance it out to have, conceptual content, but we also wanted something that's tangible, that's usable right now. And so network connectivity felt like a good one, and you can start to see that scale out to the other hyperscalers hopefully fairly shortly.
Yeah, you really hit on something earlier when you were talking about build as well. I find that interesting that if you really look at applications, and it is all about the applications, how you run them, that when you're moving applications, there are a set number of fixed applications that are out there in the universe, right? MongoDBs and, J2E applications and that. And it's just interesting when you said like taking a J2E and running it in a container, right? And like, there's so many people that are probably going to be doing the same process, right? Yes, there's the infrastructure, but then there's the application design patterns that are kind of like a migration design pattern, right? Where we've built a XYZ app, it's running on J2EE, it runs a certain way, and you're going to then migrate that into kind of this a cloud environment. It's just interesting that it's not only just the framework, it's it's application and application examples that you can have in this build design patterns that help you figure out how to do the common apps, whether it's MongoDBs or J2Es or a lot of the other ones. But there's a finite number of these things that actually exist that need to be moved over. And many, many, many companies are going to be doing the same process. So that's an interesting thought process.
Yeah, and it's not as excited as I am for the framework. I'm actually even more excited about some of the tooling that we're building behind it to make this easy, right? Like I said, right, I forget the number, but I think it's like somewhere in like 60 to 80% of like most workloads, they're Java-based, J2E based. So it's a huge estate that, is prime for us to help assess, right? And we're also getting feedback from our customers actively. And so as we talked about this, right, this is kind of VMware's point of view that we've been kind of working with customers and partners and hearing the feedback. A lot of the stuff is still up for discussion with partners and customers and hearing what they want to see worked on, right? So if you say, hey, network connectivity, right, we've got that solved. We actually want you to think about these other areas. We're definitely open to that. And in fact, we have an email address on the paper we want to engage. And if any customers or partners want to become design partners with us, right, to kind of exercise these things. But you're right, Eric, on the application side, there's so much really awesome work that's happening within our cloud business unit around focusing on how do we assess these applications, helping you understand the estate, and then quickly taking some of those examples, the low-hanging fruit is what I would call them, right? And quickly show customer value of moving that across to the cloud and start to operationalize that, take advantage of our various tons of offering. Like, we're still very, very early days, but Project Iris is certainly one to keep an eye on as part of the MapBU organization.
Yeah, I could definitely see like a tools flings that come along that actually build really interesting tools to allow you to take some of these low-hanging things and move them over, right, where people collaborate on building these type of things so that we can share it amongst, 1,000 different enterprises that are all going to be doing this.
Yeah, and that's hopefully the longer extended journey and roadmap that I see for some of these things that, John and I have talked about it. So like, this is great that you're putting all this documented down there. Here's best practice, you can follow it. But wouldn't it be awesome if you can go to VMware Cloud as a service and say, hey, I'm ready to start my journey. I want to do some level of VM migration. Right. I want to do some level of cloud native application. Give me some tools that I can just point to the infrastructure. It magically says, these are the things that's available, creates a HCX migration group for you and say, when you're ready, go and click on schedule, right? And so it's all the things that you would have been doing right now by hand. And so we're hoping that this also codifies into something that we can integrate into our service. And so that's really our longer term vision.
Nice.
But obviously, we want to be in this crawl, walk, run phase, and you'll see incremental progress in all these different areas. But I think ultimately that's kind of like the grander plan that I think we all kind of have for this project overall.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. It reminds me of the P to V days, the physical to virtual days, where we actually built tools. You could point it at a rack, and like 30 minutes later, all of the OSs were consolidated and put in 2 of the machines at the bottom of the rack, running in VMs, right? And it was literally that easy once we had those tools built. So, yeah, neat.
So very exciting, guys. This is some great resources you guys are creating for the architects out there, enterprise, cloud architects, platform, you name it, right? This is going to be relevant to all of them. Any last words, any last thoughts before we sort of move on here? Because I think, again, this is some great work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, just one thing from my end to add on to what William said. There is the email address in the white paper. We're very interested in feedback and ideas and concepts that we can incorporate into this to make it as valuable as possible to our customers. So, customers or partners out there, if they're interested in being a design partner and, kind of getting their fingerprint on this a little bit, we'd be more than happy and excited to hear from them and talk to them about it as well.
Cool. Very good. William, any last thoughts?
Second, what John says is that, our roadmap is really going to be dictated based on customers' feedback and stuff. And so we want to have this as an iterative approach and all that. And so if you have any feedback, reach out to us. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it may be and all that. Just reach out and let's have that discussion and then we can go from there.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. It was great having you on today. And this is exciting work and really important. So thanks for helping us understand what you guys are doing with it.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot, guys. That was great.